Hello, Andy.
Hey, how's it going?
Good yourself?
Oh, yeah.
So are we changing to use Microsoft Team now from now on HL7 course or HL7 AU course?
Well, in theory, you can ask Brett. We're ahead of the game. Everyone else is stuck back in the old land, whereas
Zoomland.
we're forging ahead.
Yeah, Zoom's a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? I think.
Well, at least for Microsoft Team, I can raise my hands. Where else for Zoom, I've never been able to find how to raise my hands. So that's at least there's one benefit of it.
Yeah, everything else may fall in a smelly heap, but if raising hands is the one value we get, sounds good.
Andy, as I'm a designated scribe, is there some automatic things generated or that I can look at?
You can start recording.
It's it
I think
it's automatically
records.
started recording, so you'll
Cool.
get a whole transcription of it. So in terms of scribing, you could be relatively lazy and just go, I'll take care of that when I see the transcription. And then just go, my dearest AI friend, please take this transcription. And I'm really interested in these attributes associated with the outcome. And it'll do all the work for you. Not that I'm telling
Excellent.
you need to do that. I mean, you could do the manual process, but
I'll do a bit of both because I'm keen to let AI take over my life.
yes, just provide your credit card number and it'll do everything for you.
Yes.
Don't give it to AI, give it to me. I have better use of your credit card number than AI.
Angus, unfortunately, is an apology today. He has
Really?
some excuse about being in recovery in hospital. I don't know. He rang me yesterday on the happy drugs, so I didn't get a lot out of him that made any sense. But he's having shoulder surgery or had shoulder surgery.
Okay.
And Jai has been called into a meeting. So he will join us, I think, at 12. I think we currently have 150 people on the email list.
Right.
So we'll see if we can count them all off. Someone seems to be masquerading as Linda Bird.
Yeah, I was thinking there's some names I haven't seen for a long time.
Heaven forbid, hey Andy.
I thought you just got lost.
Hi everyone.
G'day, Linda. Long time no speak.
Yes, it has been.
Hi, Linda. I haven't seen you for decades. Okay, since yesterday.
We'll give it another minute just to see if we get any stragglers.
I haven't seen you for decades, David. It's very nice to see you.
Likewise to Leslie.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the first HL7 Australia AU requesting work group meeting. We have kept the same spot as we used to use in the old TDG days. So hopefully this is all good. If you do have any issues with it now, well, in the next few meetings is a time for us to kind of relook at that, but otherwise we will forge ahead. I've set the schedule up for fortnightly. That can be adjusted as we go forward. I might start out just to get the co-chairs who are here to just run around and introduce themselves. I don't have a list in front of me, so forge ahead.
Okay, we can tag each other. Yeah, so Michael Osborne, I was involved in the R1 authoring of the eRequesting IG as part of Sparked. It's now grown up. And now I'm one of the co-chairs. So I'll hand over to David Willock.
Thanks, Michael. David Willock, Digital Lead at the Royal College of Pathologists of Australasia. Nice to meet you all. Who's next?
Megan, maybe?
I'm Megan Doherty. I'm the Acting Branch Manager for Customer Experience and Products and was co-chair when eRequesting was in Sparked. Angus here?
Nope.
No? Okay.
Now it gets more tricky.
All of us, isn't it?
I think it might be.
I'll hand back to you, Andy.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. If you got any questions through this, just either chuck them into chat or yell out, raise your hand. One of the other coaches will reach out and we will attempt to deal with anything that comes up. We've set this for an hour and a half. I don't know if that's going to be too long or too short, but we shall see. The objective is today is really very much an introductory session, just to revisit where we've come from, what we have started to agree that we're going to look at going forward, and just to kind of orient everyone around the work that's been done. So you forge ahead. Start out with an acknowledgement of country. HL7 Australia, and we're now part of that HL7 Australia formal family, acknowledges and pays respect to the elders past, present and emerging as traditional custodians and elders of Australia, and the continuing cultural and spiritual educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. These are your co-chairs currently. So not all of them look like those white males at the bottom, but we will update some photos so that you will see our happy smiley faces going forward as the slides we present. This is a rough agenda as we work through this. As you can see, the objective is today to really go through the proposed project proposals and scopes that we talked about in Sydney. I think it was in March, just to make sure obviously not everyone was able to attend that. So we'll just talk through what we ended up talking about in Sydney and the agreements that we got to at that point, and really just want to use the broader forum here to just to see if there's any questions and to re-agree in some ways that this is a happy path for us to move forward. Just start out with some usual business updates and give you all a chance to add in any thing that you want to add to this starting point. If you are looking for the minutes from the meeting in March down in Sydney, I think Angus did attempt to take some notes, so they were captured in Confluence. So if you've got any questions about them, do feel free to raise them. You'll see that as part of the new HL7 Australia work that we have a new space in Confluence under HL7 to capture the work we do, and that's where you will see the minutes beginning to appear under there. Has anyone had a chance to look at those notes or have any questions about them? Nope. Okay, we'll forward ahead then. There is a Spark testing event that also provides an opportunity to test the eRequesting standard that's out there in Brisbane, 8th of July. I don't know if anything, you want to say anything more about that, Michael?
No, just that they're looking for new scenarios. So things like referrals. So if you're doing something with the current eRequesting IG and you're attempting to use it for referrals, we're really interested in that kind of use case and what people are doing with the standards at the moment. We're looking at potentially using patient summary, maybe trying to send that in a document reference or something like that along with a referral, or any other use cases you can think of that you may want to test or that you're working on in your systems. So yeah, use that as a chance just to try different stuff out, I think.
And do you have the venue? Do you know what the venue is for it?
Yeah, so if anyone went to the Spark testing event in Brisbane last year, it's the same venue. So it's that Ridges Hotel next to the Royal Showgrounds, the Brisbane Ekka. So it was pretty good. It had decent Wi-Fi and it's pretty central. So yeah, if you can get there, it'd be great.
Alrighty, and if you've got any questions, I'm sure Michael will be quite happy to help you find the answers. As I said before, we have nominated 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time Thursdays for that eRequesting working group call. Part of us kind of setting our place in HL7 Australia is also been to fit within the structure of a working group and projects. So for those of you who aren't up to speed with how that whole thing works, there's a overarching working group that has a series of work or work items that they look after, and when there are focused pieces of work to be done, they become projects under that work group. Those projects are set up with a focus, a scope, and a timeline on which they're looking to do that work. And then the working group kind of feeds and waters those projects. And the members of the work group kind of volunteer to be part of those and do that work. When the HL7 Australia board was creating this transition across to HL7 Australia, we didn't want to kind of shortcut the focus of these newly established work groups. So we really wanted to leave it up to the work groups to in some ways forge their own future and their own kind of work. The work groups, I guess as an aside, report up through the new HL7 Australia Technical Steering Committee, whose first meeting is this afternoon. We've kind of had from a fire perspective, of a relatively sheltered life, living under the H7 Australia Fire Work Group, which was acting as kind of the parent of everything going on around the space. So we've now grown up a bit and recreated, because it used to exist a few years ago, recreated this concept of a technical steering committee under HL7 Australia. And we, as the HL7 Australia eRequesting work group, will, as it becomes enacted on the 1st of June, report back up through the AU Technical Steering Committee. But at the moment, the HL7 AU eRequesting work group is really been set up, really founded around the implementation guide that was published earlier this year. So that we defaulted to a particular scope of work for that work group, and we're going to talk through that today. We don't have to make immediate changes to any of this stuff. It's kind of business as usual in some ways with our work around the eRequesting implementation guide, but there's certainly opportunities to look at other areas of work that relate to that original eRequesting project. And as Michael kind of alluded to, the pattern in fire of request and fulfillment is actually quite a common foundational pattern, potentially for all sorts of things and not just diagnostic requesting. So this is where we kind of can think a little more broadly. Not everything necessarily needs to be a project that is delivering an implementation guide. Sometimes those implementation guides take more insights and energy and stuff that we may have to offer. And Angus and I both suggested that there are a couple of areas that I know he wants to look at from a Telstra Health perspective, and from my kind of Magentis hat on, we want to look from Magentis perspective, that we're not necessarily ready to do a full-blown implementation guide in the next maybe 12 months, but we do think that the discussions to happen around this broader use of these kind of requesting patterns and related areas of work need or benefit from neutral territory from an industry perspective, where we can discuss with government, industry, and other stakeholder perspectives, kind of marrying together without necessarily being encumbered by a particular organizational governance kind of framework. So we shall talk a bit more about that. If there are things where you think that the frequency of the meetings is too frequent, then just yell out, send something to the co-chairs. If there is where you feel that we're not meeting frequently enough, respond with that. Or if the timing's not going to work, also give some feedback. I should have put in here the mail address for the co-chairs. I know it ends in CC. Anyone know it off by hand? Is it AU eRequest CC? Someone will stick it in chat, hopefully. All right, I'll forge ahead. So as a working group, we kind of need a mission and charter. In establishing this working group through the HL7 Australia board, we kind of went with the default one. And so we're just going to have a brief look at that. So mission and charter. The work group needs to be encompassing of the projects that sit underneath it. So as potentially our set of projects broaden, so too our scope would need to broaden from a working group perspective. So it's the default one. Define the required specifications to support interoperable requesting and ordering in Australia, setting the minimum expectations of recording, updating, searching, retrieving, requesting information associated with clinical service request. That's pretty generic. It doesn't even say diagnostic in there at all at the moment. So there is some wiggle room, but it certainly isn't necessarily broad at the moment enough to encompass, for instance, reporting or things that are on the fringe. So many of you will be aware that in HL7 International, this kind of foundation really sits under an audits and observations work group, so O&O. We do need to, I think about where we want to focus ourselves and the encompassing scope that we want to cover. So maybe we'll just keep these, I'll go through these, but as we go through the other work that potentially we're looking at, maybe that's the reflection point. We can come back and revisit these. Charter, identify, design, validate fire structures to support the information exchange and workflow for both administrative and digital health needs associated with clinical service requesting. Work with HL7 International and the Australian work groups to identify appropriate designs, and we're using controlled vocabularies to encode this information. It's kind of the thing we did with the diagnostic requesting work we've already done. Identify and validate information models and the RESTful operations to support both information exchange and workflow. So I guess as a group that's looked in the past, not just at the clinical information, but more so inherently at the workflow associated with request fulfillment. That's been a big part of where we've come from. Making sure that we, wherever possible, harmonise and take into account the broader international standards in these kind of spaces. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're incumbent to those approaches, but wherever possible, obviously, we would look at being compatible and conformant with those approaches to make life easier for those working both inside and outside of Australia. Information exchange and workflow standards developed outside of Australia or outside of HL7 its affiliates, and we should attempt obviously harmonisation wherever possible across those approaches. Now, the scope, ongoing development and publication of AU eRequesting fire implementation guide. That's kind of pretty basic and is where we've come from. So again, let's just kind of go with that at the start. And as we talk through today, I think we can kind of maybe some re-articulation of where that scope might better encompass intent. As I say, this is obviously very focused on implementation guide. We also, as an HL7 Australia, have a broader family of both standards and concepts that I think we can facilitate a conversation around. Michael's already mentioned referrals, for instance. There's things to be done in that space. So where there is implementation intent, I think it's in everyone's interest that we draw those conversations and discussions into consensus-based opportunities like we kind of can do through these working group discussions. I think until there is a need otherwise, we will attempt to keep the working group call as an umbrella under which we will discuss projects until the point at which the projects have sufficient momentum to, and I guess that there's a broad enough set that we need to kind of branch out and give those projects more individual lives of their own. And that may take a bit. I guess we also have to be aware that, well, the agency has kindly volunteered to provide some well received support in terms of the recording of minutes and stuff for us. We are obviously not having the same level of investment that we potentially once had under the kind of the Sparked kind of umbrella. But I don't think that should ever mean that we can't progress. Just that we progress maybe in the HL7 Australia kind of business usual way. We'll find our own way through this. It also will mean that organisations that didn't have to step up previously in terms of helping out might see a greater need and a value in doing so, because we're not then kind of babysat by an organisation that took up all the hard yards. So if you do, as a broader group, as an individual, see that you can and want to contribute more into the eRequesting space, certainly yell out to the co-chairs. I don't think anyone will be holding any of you back in terms of more contribution as we go forward. Even in terms of, like, we're going to have to get into things like building out those implementation guide features and versions going forward. So you'll see that happen as well. So what I'm now going to kind of branch out to is the discussion around release 2 of the eRequesting implementation guide. See, now it's in the real live world as 1.0.0. That created for us a point of adoption where we can have a number of implementation decisions that are now concrete and in play. That will create, for those who have already implemented in this space, some transition challenges, but it also means that we now have to think about, well, what comes next. So I'm going to step out of this and take you all into, if I can ever get out of this. And, let me branch out into some R2 stuff. So when we were down in Sydney in March, one of the things that we talked about was, of all the candidates, pieces of work that we could look at in terms of next, what comes next. Oh, goes. One of the things is to talk about both what was things left on the backlog from R1 and also things that had some enthusiasm from those who are stakeholders in it. Michael?
Yeah, so can you just make that a bit bigger for people with small screens? I've got quite a large screen and that's still very small for me. Thank you.
That good?
Yep.
I'm just being lazy. So I did these as just markdown files. So these are all accessible from the eRequesting Confluence space. They were based on the discussions, as I say, in Sydney. We already have a eRequesting project, so we're not doing a project proposal, but more so looking at changing the scope for R2. So what I wanted to do today was to talk through what this R2 scope is going to look like, or potentially look like. It's basically 3 areas of work that we talked about. One of them was this concept of transfer of request fulfillment. The reason for doing it was that as part of our obligation to policy setting of patient choice, we wanted some way of proactively supporting the end-to-end accessibility of digital requests, even though the chosen filler may change through the life of the request. And to do that, it requires some additional work, and in particular, a way for labs and imaging providers to obtain access to a request where they may not have been the original intended filler. The other reason we did it is that this has a existing footprint in industry. It kind of works, so it's not kind of an abstract academic concept. There are some lessons learned, certainly, in what has resulted from this. So we have it's a good kind of concrete foundation of learning what has happened in terms of implementation, what didn't work so well, what did work well, and whether there are alternative approaches that we could add into this to make it work better. I would say that the kind of having this work in pathology versus imaging are quite different. Conceptually, it's the same thing. The patient sits with the original requesting clinician. They, in collaboration, come up with potentially a recommendation of where this service should be provided. Patient walks out with some form of token representation or a piece of paper. They rock up at their chosen provider. Well, let's say it's different, then the idea is that that chosen provider has a way of reaching back and obtaining access to the whole digital content. This is kind of similar to the old ETP world, where we are enabling a digital representation of the request at the point of service. That obviously means that transcription doesn't need to occur and that you get a like-for-like kind of version of that information. This, however, has, I guess, in some ways, some of the challenges that ETP had for prescribing back then, which is that the coexistence of a paper pathway and a digital pathway can introduce some challenge. There is nothing stopping a clinician augmenting the paper document post digital request creation with additional notes and direction that is not necessarily going to be digitally received, obviously. So that can create challenges. There is also challenges here on the nature of fulfillment. Whereas in pathology currently, fulfillment tends to be complete, as in a lab that you take or a collection center you take your request along to, they often will simply go, thanks for your request, we'll do everything, and don't you worry about a thing. Behind the scenes, they might use alternative providers to fill in the gaps or more efficiently provide some of the components of your request. but from your perspective, they took on the obligation of fulfillment. In imaging, that diverse fulfillment is often upfront and visible to the patient, because obviously it's not that your sample potentially is collected at the collection center and then magically, shared and appropriately used behind the scenes. In imaging, you as the patient have to front up at the various service providers to provide the images. So there are some subtleties to that make it a little more complex than maybe we've talked about. I don't know if anyone else has any commentary on this concept of transfer of request fulfillment. We do need to come up with a better name. I think the transfer of request fulfillment has been, people have said to me that is the ugliest and most undefined and unreasonable name you could have chosen. But I don't know a better one at the moment. Anyone have any comments or any issues with this being on our R2 agenda? Yes, someone's raised their hand.
Sorry, just finding my unmute button. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm very glad to see this is on the agenda, because we are looking at this from a cancer register perspective. In Queensland, notifications from medical imaging providers and pathology providers are in scope and must be notified for cancer-related orders, and this is a real problem for us in being able to trace these requests when they're not fulfilled by the person or the filler who received the request in the first place. So very happy to see it on here.
Cool.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. That one has some good attributes to it in that we can get started pretty quickly, and we kind of, I think, as a community, will be able to present warts and all of what happens, how it's worked, and things that we could look at. So it's not certainly starting from a blank slate, but will, I think, very much add significant complexity to the requesting process. So that's the first one. The second one is this, something we talked about in and through our work on eRequesting 1.0, and that is the definition of a transaction bundle. We never got to this. I think Heath maybe raised it. A couple of people talked about it. It's strictly, in theory, it's not a kind of a must-have from a, can we make something work without it? Yes, we can, but it does turn out to be intensely useful as we go forward. The formal definition of a transaction bundle that you can validate against means that you can be a lot more confident of the complete nature of a request and how you define that at the point of request creation. It's actually not potentially that hard to do in terms of defining that bundle, because we obviously have all the building blocks. We would be using it, such bundles, transaction bundles anyway, most of the time. We just haven't done the effort to formalize it. So I don't know if anyone else has any comments around this. I think it'll please implementers to have this available. It does mean, though, that as we change things within the eRequesting data model, they also have to reflect back into that bundle. We can, in the bundle, also add in additional constraints that may be bundle specific in terms of the relationship and dependencies between data that we may not have done with the individual resources. Michael.
I think having attended most of the connectathons, this is the single most common thing people ask when they're doing their postman sends or posts up to the servers is, you know, how do I get all of these things in a bundle and send it all in one go? So yeah, it's extremely common request. For people just starting, it's really useful. So yeah, let's get it in there.
I don't think, and someone correct you if I'm wrong, but I don't know if we have examples of bundles in the IG now.
No, we don't.
Yeah, and that certainly makes I think I'm new to this, show me how to do it. You know, if you've got a transaction bundle example, it becomes really obvious what these collections of data looks like to make use of them. It will also become more useful as we go down the transfer of fulfillment as well around this. Again, this should, in theory, be relatively straightforward in a different way to the first work item, in that we can actually, I think, create a pretty good cut at this from the stuff we already have in play in the IG now, just to kind of round it out. We can even probably take the existing examples that live in the IG on the individual resources and repurpose them into the bundle example, and that would give that foundation. We could also flavor the bundles to give different stakeholder groups a better idea of how they could approach eRequesting within their context of use, by just having that different flavor. So things like questions around, you know, how the urgent communication maybe relates back to the other elements within the transaction. So it was in particular the code for the service request had a pathology test that was often done for urgent purposes. We could kind of mix that with the other resources to be more contextually relevant. It was also potentially we can include things that go beyond the implementation guide. So, you know, while we've got some specific communication requests that we include in the spec. If there are other communication requests that make sense, you know, we have never been as a specification a maximal specification. It's a minimal specification. So it does give you the opportunity to think about some of those other uses of this kind of stuff, of these kind of communication requests, etc. If, for instance, there's a cancer registry that you want to kind of communicate to, or a oncology provider that needs to get this, so you can do it with copy twos, but there's all sorts of other opportunities to extend this kind of work. Michael?
I think one of the ways to use communication requests that I've seen in work I've done is for clinical alerts, like for where a result is critical, that kind of thing. So when we get into the reporting side of things, we might want to look at a profile that's like this is really urgent type thing.
Yeah. The other thing that, well, I'm currently going through in terms of transition to the standard is other kind of the implementation guidelines that potentially if some of this stuff needs to be made more explicit. So one of the things in fire that you may or may not be aware of is that the fire use is a little bit different than the old kind of version 2 world in that we have a number of parts of the specification where you can have alternative data sets for use. And it was always I think in version 2, Vince will correct me if I'm wrong, but that if you didn't recognize something, then you should be able to still progress without erroring out and going, I don't know what this is. And kind of in fire, we've got a similar thing, but some very specific instances of use. So for instance, we have in the IG use tags. And one of the things that you should be able to work forward with is that what someone who's creating a request puts additional tags in that have no current defined meaning. And it should be clinically safe to ignore those tags unless there's some pre-existing a need with the placer and the filler for those to have clinical significance. And then we would need to make sure they're well defined in the IG. But for instance, like there's often a need to carry through additional information. So tags is one of them, codings is another. You might have both SNOMED coding and a low encoding, but our spec only talks about a SNOMED coding. You should happily ignore the low encoding because the semantics of that is you can have multiple codings for a concept. That was the whole point of it. You might have and one of the things we're working with is an extension where the extension is actually safe to ignore. And to be able to carry those extensions that where useful, you should use them. But where they're not, you don't have to use them. We've already made some recommendations around supporting clinical information in the request that we've said it would be, you should always ensure that there is narrative description of supporting clinical information so that even those who don't understand the structured content, they have a way of accessing it in an unstructured way. That being a lot more concrete would certainly help in terms of transition going forward. All right, side note, work item 3. So we only came up with 3 of these things to do. The reason we stuck with 3 was mainly because of our constrained resourcing of eRequesting. So I'm hoping those things are quite doable in the kind of the 12-month window we're looking at. So this third one is specimen support. We have, since very early days, known that specimen is something that is actively used within diagnostic requesting in the community, where there is a specimen that has been collected, and that as a collected specimen, we want to be able to recognize and link it to a diagnostic request. This is not at this point looking at taking up the whole specimen fulfillment process. So we're not looking to document a task which would track the need to collect a specimen, the collection itself, and then the kind of the way that goes about being enacted. We're just trying to say that for a request, whether it has been home collection or practice collection, that you do have a way of identifying information about the specimen to carry with the request, because at the moment, the way we would either end up doing that as a kind of a local add-on to the existing eRequesting spec, or we would simply probably see that in clinical notes as I've got nowhere else to put it. I'm going to leave it there and make of it what you will at the other end. There are 2 or 3 things that we can make very concrete in our implementation guide, which when needed would give you a concrete starting point for providing specimen identification, information about, body site it was collected, when it was collected, those kind of things. Does anyone have any questions about that? Does it make sense? All right. We only chose those. We did have a big kind of conversation in Sydney about it. These were the most tractable ones that we got, that people had some interest in, wanted to get behind. I think these are all doable. We will have to probably be quite rigid on the scope of the first one, mainly because some of the implications of it, we might have to go, we're not ready for that yet, but we at least got a tractable starting point that is still useful. So unless there are objections, I guess at the moment, I would kind of put forward a motion that we look at extent or specifying the scope of R2 to encompass these three, that we look at roughly a 12-month piece of work to get these into a new release of the implementation guide. I think we will potentially pick up some other smaller pieces along that path, but these will be our three areas of focus. If we finish early, happy days. Hopefully they won't take us longer. Is anyone happy to second the motion based on this draft PSS?
I'm happy.
Yeah.
All right. I haven't set up, I don't know if Brett's here. Do we have, I don't know if we have voting in this yet.
Oh, I can give it a go. Hang on.
That's what I like to hear.
It might
Confidence.
take me a minute. It might take me a minute. Do this one by hand.
Okay. Is there anyone who would not support this, so votes negative? Have you raise your hand? We'll stick a, yeah, raise your hand if you're voting negative. Anyone? Okay, I'm assuming don't raise your hand now if you're voting negative, because I've gone past that. So that's a 0 voting negative. Does anyone want to abstain from voting? Excellent. Unanimous then. We will then base the votes on those who are in attendance. All right.
So 3200.
Excellent.
Because you can't vote.
All right. So that's the biggest piece of work to get through. What we will then do in the next meeting is this will be our focus to start this and to kind of lay some groundwork for moving this forward. Whether at that point we want to split and do some things in parallel, do we want to do them in sequence? We'll go through that in the next 2 weeks. The last two I want to do are we don't need to conclude them today, because these are there is a starting points, not necessarily concluding points. So say Angus sends his apologies today, but there are two things I want to talk about, which are new areas of interest that fall under potentially a broader eRequesting scope. And that then has implications for the working group scope itself, but also agreeing upon whether these two pieces of work have sufficient backing to say, no, we don't want to touch these are terrible, don't go near them, or happy for this to become part of our area of interest, and we would love to see this kind of some information about these concepts emerge within this group. So the first one is the concept of diagnostic reporting. This is something that has kind of come out of obviously the requesting side of things. One of the things that in seeing through diagnostic requesting, it's become pretty obvious that tying the request back to then a subsequent report has immense value for the requesting clinician, because now you can kind of, what I term, do round trip requesting back to the report. It's not to say this is the only way that the report's going to be received, but by having this kind of linked channel, we can create something that's more within the family of the e-requesting, file-based e-requesting. But to do this, there needs to be a concrete way of representing reports. And there are some uses of file-based reporting. I know Magentis is doing it in imaging, in pilot. Angus and Telstra Health do have an interest in doing this in pathology. So he has been looking at creating a representation of a pathology report. There is international work in this as well. I know Dave McKillop has thankfully been attending some very early mornings to look at, and so is Michael, some reporting approaches and how observations are structured and grouped going forward. Angus would otherwise be kind of making the pitch for this. Angus is, I think, I'm happy to put words in his mouth to say he would be an active contributor to this. We do have several show of hands in Sydney to say yes, they too would be willing to be part of that investigation and looking for some conclusions to come out, giving us guidance in Australia about moving forward with diagnostic requesting, diagnostic reporting in Australia. So we would like to move forward with a project proposal that lives underneath the broader requesting scope to investigate, and as an outcome to create a some report back to this group to give guidance on suggested ways forward. He might have a draft implementation guide for documentation purposes. We don't at this point in time have a intent to ballot that at this point in time, but merely to work through what an approach might be and to give an opportunity for those who are doing stuff in this space to have somewhere they could bring their work and to see through some collaborative consensus discussion about good and bad ways to do it. I guess this is the opportunity. If you haven't had a look at it, do have a look at the draft project proposal and scope and tell us whether we're going down the wrong path or whether you have other suggestions. I'll kind of open the floor up. Michael's here at least to say, does anyone have anything to talk about around this? Michael.
So while people think about that, I've just put something in the chat. So there is an overlap with AU Core, who are looking at a diagnostic, actually more than one diagnostic report profile. So one for pathology reports and one for notes. There's a Confluence page. There's a lot of discussion on that page. And the AU Core meeting discussion about this starts next week on Thursday. It goes over 2 meetings. Michael Wilson, are you still there? Can you add anything to this?
Yeah, just let me check. I actually think it may start tomorrow, was it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it starts tomorrow. So there's a information session tomorrow, the first one, AU Core information session 24th, tomorrow at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So that's the initial conversation talking about what might be in scope. So it's just an information session. It's going to be a very open session to talk about it. So if you have any interest, and I imagine quite a few people on this call would have an interest there, I would recommend you come along so you can be part of the conversation and see where it's going. I will put a link in the chat as soon as I stop talking to put that one in. But there is, yeah, so the 24th It will also be discussed in the AU Core Work Group call, which will be on the 1st. And then there's a second information session on the 8th as well. So the next 3 weeks, AU Core is talking about this topic. So if you have an interest, definitely come along. And then we can help find out where that line is between what might be an AU Core and what might be part of this work group. So it'll be good to sort of get that context.
Thanks, Michael.
Lynn, did you want to talk to what you put in the chat?
Hi, can you hear me? I've just had to change.
Yes.
Yeah, I just was wondering what the relationship is with AUCDI, and if there are clinical requirements that come out of this, and whether or not we need to, be aware and something we can add into our work plan as well.
Yeah, I think they will emerge out of this as we look at the relationship between structured and unstructured reporting. So yeah, we'd certainly keep AUCDI abreast of kind of things, and obviously we'll be shooting over questions for an input. This is far more exploratory, I think, than where eRequesting has gone before. So we kind of know more as we know more about
that's
this.
fair enough. Yeah, I think we're just keen to be supportive. So, if there is anything we can do to help, then please let us know.
Excellent. You have been recorded.
Noted.
In terms of the some of you might go, well, if AU's Core is doing this, why are we doing this? Why would we look at this in here? And I guess one of the things that we will obviously be thinking about, maybe more so than AU Core, is this is not just about the diagnostic report resource. This is actually will also encompass the workflow of reporting. So it's going to then, one of the things we've done is obviously we've had some experience with the task kind of fulfillment process. So equally alongside the report, it's not just about the data out of context. It's actually within the context of delivery and handover of care back to the requesting clinician potentially, or to the copy twos on the report, how all of that series of interactions all are orchestrated. So that's why, I guess, from an eRequesting perspective, we're kind of looking at it from a more of a holistic use case of the data and the workflow working together to kind of solve a problem. Yet we would want to make sure that the underpinnings of AU Core will set and play any of the constraints or broader commitments we make to the data that we need to carry into this, if that makes sense. So that one is the diagnostic reporting. The other one that I introduced was referrals. And the reason for that is obviously all centers back to what was the bread and butter of our eRequesting work, which was service request task. And that pattern is immensely useful. And in fact, as others probably have heard in the last couple of weeks, for me, making sure that pattern is actually consistent even through medication requesting, like prescribing, it's such a powerful way of making the interactions between the clinical community more workflow driven and more transparent, and therefore is a really foundational building block for collaboration. So not just about moving data in isolation from one point to another, but actually being a way of specifying the collaboration that happens between patients, requesters, and service providers. So the referrals is going on around the place. There's a lot of discussion around enabling referrals in a fire-based world. And so in a similar vein to what Angus was talking about with diagnostic reporting, I want to have somewhere where, independent of any one or bilateral organizational conversations, or kind of government conversations, that we can create a forum in which we can bring some challenges, some questions, some opportunities, some examples to a forum which can then relate this back to diagnostic requesting, diagnostic reporting, and hopefully seeing what we can harvest to also support referrals in the same light, to use that request fulfillment pattern to get more leverage for the investments that we've already made. So that's kind of my sales pitch for looking at referrals. Say in Sydney, that everyone said sounds like a good idea. Say we're not at that level of maturity that we're locked into an IG, but we want to be able to put in front of everyone maybe hey, have a look at this. We think this is a tractable way forward. Here's how it relates to your requesting, and to potentially build up to a point where those referrals. And yes, Kylan, that will also need to have a kind of a relationship back to AUCDI and the drivers for the workflow and the data from AUCDI perspective. So we'll come at this with the hat of what do we have from a fire implementation perspective, and how we bring that to the table. So we're certainly open to all of those requirements coming in. We'll feed them back to AUCDI and say, these are some questions that have been kind of talked around. What can we do together in this space? I'm sure someone's got a hand that they'd like to raise to talk about referrals. Does anyone think it's a bad idea to talk about referrals in the community that is talking about requesting?
I think you're crazy, Andy.
I know.
No, look, it's an opportune time. I think we've learned a lot with and hi everyone, it's Joe. We've learned a lot, I think, through the first phase of eRequesting, and there's certainly a natural alignment when we think about consistent patterns and not wanting to go on divergent paths where there's commonalities. I think too, we've had the recent consultation come out from the department around referral policy and those types of components. So I think we can also bring some of those elements into the conversation, knowing that we do some discovery and scoping, and then think about in the future how that starts to form into an approach for an IG.
Vince?
There was an enormous amount of work done by IT 14.6 on referrals, and there are a couple of standards which are still actually current standards. They're in V2. There's an IHE profile as well. But I think that the actual transactions and the type of data that is relevant can very usefully be taken from those standards as exemplars of how e-referral works. Those standards have been implemented reasonably widely for things like discharge summaries. So I think there's a lot of prior work there that can be used as a building block for the fire work. So definitely something I think that we should be leveraging. My only concern with doing this within this group is, do we have the bandwidth? I remember in IT 14.6, it was a very wide-ranging and lengthy discussion. It took many years. Stephen Chu was there as well, so he was also aware of what that took. So I'm just concerned that we might not have the bandwidth to undertake that. But if we build on that previous knowledge and work, then maybe we can.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and referrals is a huge kind of breadth of need and breadth of scope, and we would, I think, need to be judicious on what are we actually trying to achieve out of it. And it was one of the reasons why I guess both Angus and I both wanted to be very explicit up front to say we don't expect this to result in another implementation guide at the level of maturity of the eRequesting work potentially, but at least if we don't have somewhere to have that open discussion within a fire-centric kind of perspective, that there will be implementation work that gets undertaken in isolation within industry around this. And I want to make every excuse we can to have industry share their work in this space and have a way that we can cross-pollinate those needs. And I think it will also help government see what goes on and have a forum in which those needs can be expressed. But it is well noted, Vince, and we certainly, I think we will want to feed in that existing V2 experience and standards. Anyone else?
Andy, there's a comment from Nick Ferris. I'm not sure if you want to address that. It's regarding the diagnostic reporting stuff.
Okay, just let me.
I was just replying to that. I was just going to say that the role of AE Core and that relationship to other specifications is quite well defined. I was just going to put a link into the relationship to other specifications, like in the eRequesting IG.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah, it's probably just worthwhile noting in terms of the roles of AU Base, AU Core, and say AU eRequesting, which are quite nicely kind of lined up in that we are probably as AU eRequesting IG really at the end of a food chain where we have a unique contribution to contribute from an eRequesting perspective, but likewise, like AU Base sets in play the definitions of how things can be done. Then AU Core's role is to set really constraints of use to say, if you are going to use a patient within Australia, AU Core defines these requirements. So you must have this data, you've got must support information, things around that data. And then an IG like eRequesting takes it to a specific use case, to a specific scope of use. Yeah, so that's the diagram that we kind of came up with a while ago. It's used to say that from eRequesting, there are some things that we will take directly from R4 because, like Fire R4, because there is no Australian relocalization that calls out an AU base role or an AU core role. There will be things that AU base AU base define as useful additions to our to Fire Core as an R4, but there is no additional constraints that need to be applied as yet has been identified. So AU Core has nothing to say about it. So we in AU eRequesting would have used them directly from base. And then there are some things where AU base have added their own kind of layer of interpretation and constraint to it. And then AU eRequesting would use something out of base rather than out of core rather than base, or rather than directly back to the very general AU5 foundations. It actually is quite it's quite a nice kind of set of differences there. I complained about this diagram because I didn't really like the fact that we didn't represent the richness of the range of things that you can select from, but that was certainly the intent, I think, in everyone's mind.
Yeah, I think that was well explained, Andy, that this is only illustrative, that exactly like you said, eRequesting derive things directly from the HL7 fire standard. It doesn't have to take from AU base or AU core if they're not there. So,
Michael.
I think as far as boundaries go, it helps to understand that AU Core has different actors and roles to eRequesting. So we have more workflow. They don't discuss workflow at all in AU Core. So we throw our own actor roles in there about who's the actor that's responsible for the diagnostic report, and also around the life cycle of the report and the request and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we're just adding a more implementable flavor to what AU Core would do.
Yep. So I'm going to make another motion now, which is that people, and this is not locking us into, as I say, implementation guide delivery, and Vince's point is very well taken, and we should certainly look at this in regard to, we're a voluntary force, and we don't have extraordinary kind of injection of resourcing beyond Mr. McKillop, who's very, very good, I would say. So we do have that help, but we do need to be realistic about what we can do and how we do it. But I would like to at least provide the opportunity to discuss forums to discuss these two pieces around diagnostic reporting and the referrals. The promise that we would make is that we would come out with something at the end of the period that would give back to this group the insights that we find, and if there is something more concrete we can do that's tractable, then we would come back to the group and discuss it. So I just want to put a motion forward that you're happy that we put these forward as formal projects for this group, and that we then allow them to do that work under the auspices of the eRequesting work group, and we will amend and provide back to this group, possibly even for next week, if you agree, that we can broaden the scope to at least include that work around the reporting investigation and the referral investigation within this context. Did you give up on me, Brett, or do you want me to do this manually? I'm
going to give it a go. You want to do this?
I need a seconder. Does someone second that we can put these up as project proposals to AUTSC or the helper
Sure.
organisation?
I'm a bit concerned that you as chair shouldn't be motioning things.
Okay, good. That's a very good point.
I'm happy to motion it. What was so? Can you give me the words again, and I'll motion it.
The motion is that these project proposals and project scopes be put up to the AUTSC.
I move what Andy just said. Yes. Any second? Actually, that's your job, asking for seconds.
Anyone second?
Sure, I can, Dave McKillop.
Excellent. Okay. Ooh, Slido.
Are we not doing any further discussion?
Little while to load.
Is there any broader discussion around it?
Yes, my hand's up.
Oh, Ruben, you fell off the bottom of my screen.
Your motion said this to go to TSC. Is it not?
Yeah.
Only TSC from June, and in the interim, it's Fire Work Group and the board.
Yes, and that's why I was kind of saying or equivalent.
Okay.
As
Gotcha.
we're going through that transition period to the 1st of June. Very good, Ruben. Vince.
Andy, I'd actually like to see a formal written proposal. I think the scope of this really needs to be very clearly defined, and I'm not sure that we've necessarily captured that. So I'd really like to see a written proposal before we approve it.
Have you seen the written documents on the?
No, I haven't. Is it there?
Yeah, they've all been up for a month or so.
Right. Okay, my bad.
Andy, did you want to share those on your screen? I know you had those markdown files there, the PSS and that kind of thing.
The location of them.
Maybe we get a comment from Stephen while we're waiting for you.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Just from a procedural perspective, I don't think that we need a proposal to submit we don't need a motion and passing the motion to submit a project scope statement or proposal. I think if a project scope statement or proposal is already available, then the motion is to submit rather than making a proposal to prepare. If I hear you correctly.
Yes, that was certainly the intent, but I'm happy to put this off till next meeting. There's no kind of rush, to be honest, to get these two through, so we can give people a chance to have a read of these. I've got the Confluence site up. Feel free to have a go at them. I will move them into the standard format over the next couple of weeks. So let's put that to a side for a minute, just so we don't rush through it and give everyone that opportunity. So everyone's job over the next 2 weeks is, if you do have an interest, then have a look at those and make comments on the e-referrals and the reporting proposals and scope. And we'll just stick with the change in scope of the R2. And I think we all agreed to that. I'll submit that to, as Ruben said, the firework group and the board for approval, pending the AUTSC taking on such a responsibility on the 1st of June. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah, appreciate that, Andrew. Andy, can you put the link to those in the chat as well?
Yeah. Those links will also be in the minutes. That'll be enough to get you there, I think.
That works.
Excellent. All right. Next meeting, next meeting we plan to talk about 3 pieces of work for AU requesting. If in the meantime there is anything else you want to add to the agenda for the next meeting in 2 weeks, email one or more of the co-chairs and we will add that to the agenda. I'll be handing off some responsibilities to the other co-chairs to cover off some of those 3 areas, so we have something concrete to talk about. So that is about it for today. Does anyone have anything they would like to raise?
One thing, Andy. Sorry, I had to step out of the meeting for a bit in the middle, so I'm not sure if while discussing eRequesting R2, the topic of terminology was touched on in too much detail, but I just, as an FYI, and I will add a comment about this when I have a look at the proposal, the terminology workgroup is going to be putting forward a project proposal to create an HL7 Australia terminology artifacts IG, similar to HL7 terminology or THO at the international level. We are not, right now, we are not saying every terminology artifact in all the IGs need to go in there, but it is certainly an option for any work groups that would like their artifacts maintained as part of that IG rather than in a dedicated use case IG like eRequesting. So I just wanted to make sure that's on everyone's radar. I note there are about 7 value set artifacts in eRequesting. Everything else seems to be leveraging stuff from the FICOR spec, THO, or the NCTS. So if there's interest in that, then terminology work groups got you. Thank you.
Excellent. It might actually be useful to, as we kind of start that terminology work group experience, to kind of have an FAQ in some ways for terminology, because I think for many people it might be a bit abstract in terms of how they kind of relate. So yeah.
Sure.
Yep. Does anyone else have any questions about the terminology work group? They've had a couple of meetings, so they're 100% more experienced than we are in this. All right, so you've at least got a couple of people who turn up at the terminology group as well. So we should be able to have good cover of that.
Sure.
Anyone else? I did see another hand at some point, but maybe it got lost. All righty. So that's it for today. Thank you all for attending. And hopefully you will be around for the next one. As I say, if you've got anything you want to reach out about, we can do better, or we have something that we need, then do feel free to reach out and email us, and we'll do what we can to help. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
See you next time.
Cheers all.
See ya.
Thanks, Andy.
Bye.
Bye.